I'm really excited to be here today. I was looking back at some files this morning and realizing we've just passed the anniversary of our kicking off together and working together. So I'm excited to see what you guys got me after the meeting. It'll be nice. I think that, hearty laughter, always appreciate it, thank you. I think that honestly, it's been a pretty spectacular partnership from our perspective over the last year. And I think the reason why is exactly what both President Young and Mary spoke about. This notion, this shared belief that branding efforts are not about just the messages you put out there. In fact, they're really more about who you are. We always say that brand is who you are and marketing is what you say. And a lot of the time of the last year has been spent really listening deeply to figure out exactly who we are, who we want to be, before we decide what we want to say to the world about ourselves. And so the beginning of that was really listening. And I think this first slide, these research insights, which I appreciate you not reading ahead on, thank you, are really about that listening. What we did was begin by going around the university, around the community, around the different constituencies and stakeholder groups, and really listening, saying, where are we right now? Where do we want to be? And we heard very consistent themes, like shockingly consistent themes, given the fact that we spoke to hundreds and hundreds of people. The first one that we heard over and over again was unify the brand now. A deep, deep appetite and passion for it. Can we have a singular, higher level story? Can we get together, get united, and get a message out there? That appetite is not always something that we find in organizations, institutions, companies that we work with. That deep shared sort of desire is a really big key to the success, and I think it's also key to what President Young spoke about. The other thing was a really deep belief that we share very much, that branding is about, we have to brand from the inside out. We have to agree, we have to be excited, we have to be aligned before we move forward. So an equal part of the time of the last year has been about building that shared alignment. It's been about listening hard, about having tough conversations when necessary. It's been about really reflecting back the seemingly disparate but ultimately united perspectives of a really group of passionate supporters and passionate believers. We also heard, and this was very heartening for us, a deep desire to go big and be bold. Not to be sort of retiring and aw shucks, as we all know we can sometimes be in this region, but to get out there with statements, with beliefs, with actions, with behaviors that really demonstrate the greatness and the scope and scale of this institution, which is great. That's what we wanted to do too. There was also a really strong desire to be, to really position ourselves as what we are, which is a magnet for the Pacific Northwest region. So one thing we heard often was, you know, a lot of the corporations here get a lot of credit for the innovation, for the spirit, for the drive of the region. Ultimately, so much of that accrues back to the University of Washington. Can we claim our rightful space? We sort of spent a lot of time at the beginning jokingly saying, this is about you guys getting credit for what you're already doing. And I think that's still very, very much true. And then last, but certainly not least, this notion of acting as a leader for the state. Really understanding the way in which the public university model, it continues to evolve, really understanding the importance of capital campaigns, of fundraising campaigns, and understanding that we need to get out there with what we believe and then understand that the actions and results that we want from Olympia will follow, rather than sort of the reverse position of that. So those were the insights that we heard. And from there, we sort of launched forward. And the key thing that that all kind of unified with was this notion that dreaming is not enough. And what that really means is that our impacts matter. It's not enough to just be you know, a higher education institution focused on the future. That's not unique. That idea of we're passionate and we think about things a lot, congratulations, that's awesome, but everybody else does too, right? So how does that differentiate the University of Washington? This deep understanding that change only comes with action, right? The change that we envision only matters when we make it real in the world. And that ultimately the impact of what you do is real in the world. So this notion that dreaming isn't enough, this notion that we imagine what's possible and then we make it real, that we bring it forth into the world, that was a really, really key takeaway for everything that we were going to do. And I think that we'll talk more about this as we get into the work, but this is an important differentiator that gets you out of this space of a lot of what is ultimately kind of a look-alike, sound-alike category. We did one thing at the beginning where we looked at a lot of universities' advertising and saw just how sort of crushingly consistent the themes and the messages and even the images were. And then we watched that, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that Monsters University trailer that spoofs sort of university brand videos and is pretty much dead on, other than the fact that it has monsters in it. So we challenged ourselves collectively to not just do the best university campaign that we could do, but to do just a great campaign that speaks to the greatness of the university. So Mary talked a bit about this, really focusing on a target mindset. As you said very clearly, I will echo, this is not about only talking to students, but it is absolutely about looking through the lens of the students that we want to talk to. So if we create messaging and a campaign and a brand that resonates amazingly in this room, that's great. If it doesn't land at all with the prospective students we want to reach, not so great. So really important as we start to move into creative and beyond strategy, we see this with the eyes of the people that we're trying to really bring in to be the next generation of what the University of Washington is. And that's been, I think, something we've really held ourselves accountable to as we've gone. So the brand promise that we worked through a complex brand pyramid. We spent a lot of time and a lot of meetings and long conversations. And the promise at the top of that ended up resonating very strongly was this idea of together undaunted for a world of good. That promise, which is certainly more internal facing than external facing, and by more I mean completely, was really, really important for us to unify around. And really became the foundation, the analogy I always use is the notion of kind of the foundation of a building, right? The building we're going to build is the messages that we put out into the world. But if the foundation isn't sound, then the building certainly won't be. This idea of together undaunted for a world of good spoke to the differentiating aspects of how we work, of who we are, and how we see the world. And I very much hope you'll see that come to life as we go through the work. There's that pyramid I mentioned. So the top of it, as you see with that brand promise, has together undaunted for a world of good. For us, these pyramids are really important tools because at the beginning, at the bottom, they really focus on the functional differentiators of the university. And we spent a lot of time talking very closely with a lot of groups throughout the U, really faculty playing a big role in that, saying, what do we do that's demonstrably different? And what can we tell stories about? If we're going to put a lot of messages and stories out there, what are the spaces in which we can talk about them that are truly different from our competitors? That notion of leading edge student experience was very, very important and really talking about what that means. The notion of public as a philosophy. Again, public university means something other than just sort of the charter of the university. There is a belief system behind that, and it's vital that we put that out in everything that we do. The proven impact, we've touched on that. We will touch on that many, many times again in the next few minutes. And then really the strong innovation mindset, this idea that you have a group of people, both students and all of you and faculty and everyone here, who sees what exists, sees what is possible, and then works hard to bridge the gap between the two. So as we move up that pyramid from functional differentiators up to sort of emotional bond, that promise becomes our statement of why, our purpose, our unifying sort of anthem that we move forward with. So we worked very hard to get out of the typical space of demographics. We really together didn't say, we're for students of this particular age in these particular cities and this particular socioeconomic group with this particular GPA and this list of extracurricular activities. We instead really thought about the mindset, because the way to attract the students that you really, really want isn't just to look at them the same way as everybody else, but to see something other, something deeper inside of them. So who are we for? We're for people who believe anything is possible. We're for people who think about the greater good. We're for self-starters, for change creators, for achievers, for collaborators, for people who are real-world, authentic in the way that they do things. They value that authenticity from the brands they connect themselves to, and they've told us that. And these are people who think in equal parts about me and we, and I think that's an important one. These aren't selfless givers, but these are people who are focused on themselves and themselves within the context of a greater good. So they absolutely are looking for their own advancement, but they're looking to make an impact wider than themselves in the way that they do it. This mindset, I think, if we're really honest about it, and I think we have been, absolutely ladders back to what President Young talked about. This isn't everybody. Great brands define who they're for, and in doing so define who they're not for. There's a challenge in here. We're asking people to step up and to not just check the boxes on, yep, I got this GPA, yep, I did this, I was in 4 clubs. This is more about how do you see the world? Do you step up to challenge? Do you ask yourself to do more? And the work that we put out there creatively is going to articulate that in very emotional ways that give people an opportunity to sort of opt in or opt out. That challenge is important in everything we do. And I'm moving fast through this, so we'll have time. But if anything is unclear, just give me kind of a cross-eyed look, and I'll sense it, and I'll get clearer about it. The personality of this brand, the personality of the messaging and the creative that we want to put out there is really, really important. And this notion of the personality of the brand reflecting the personality of the people that we're trying to attract is particularly important here. So if we always sort of jokingly say, if you imagine this brand, if you imagine the University of Washington on a cocktail party, what would they be like? Well, we think they'd be bold, they'd be tenacious, they'd be visionary, they'd be confident, they'd be boundless, and they'd be compassionate. And that compassion was an important element. We really had together in a lot of listening gotten to bold, tenacious, visionary, confident, boundless, and somebody raised their hand in a meeting like this and said, that person doesn't sound like they're very nice. And we sort of stepped back and said, you know, you're right. And this university sends more people to the Peace Corps than anybody else. And boy, there's all these other things. Maybe there's a missing part of this personality. So that compassion, which I think we all intuitively understood, we needed to articulate to make sure that it showed up in everything that we did. So a really important, nice discovery as we went along to create a nice cocktail party person. So. Okay, so then we did creative testing. And that testing was about qualitative communication testing of 2 campaigns to guide decision-making for a single concept. This is the part where I say it wasn't about a vote for which idea do you like better. It was really about us learning. So we wanted to understand key messages and how they resonated. We really wanted to see people reflect back a compelling and motivating concept. We wanted to know very precisely, was the work that we were doing positively reinforcing and improving perceptions? And then identify potential areas for optimization. And that's really important. And that's why it wasn't just sort of an up-down vote. It was, let's listen to what's resonating, let's listen to what people are hearing, let's listen to what they're reacting to, and then let's be smart about how to create something great coming out of that. So the focus groups, there were 18 in total, 120 people. We talked to prospective students, we talked to prospective students' parents, a very important audience as well. We talked to alumni, we talked to donors, current students, faculty, and staff. And we talked to them in 3 representative markets, Seattle, Spokane, and Orange County. I will say, because it's come up as a question a couple of times, the weighting of that testing and the weighting of those conversations was more toward prospective students based on the strategy that we talked about, but it's more about how we interpreted things than it is some sort of unwieldy numbers load in the way that things were focused. The concepts that were tested sort of fell into 2 main directions, 2 main territories. The first was called transformation, and the second was we believe. And this group has seen this work, so no, not seen this work? Some people have seen this work. Okay. Well, then I'll talk really briefly about it. The first direction, transformation, was really about interesting juxtapositions of how we see the world and then the possibility we see inside of it. So the best example is always this garbage can that says fertilizer on it, right? This is the story of a student here who saw the garbage on campus, saw how much of what was being thrown away wasn't actually waste, and started the garbology department, which was a leading sort of composting effort here in the University of Washington, identifying something like 90% of the garbage thrown away wasn't actually garbage. It could be put back into a system, recycled or composted. So that garbology department, that I see a problem, I see a solution, I see something differently than other people, is a good example of what transformation was about. It was that moment of inflection, right? We believe was a little bit different. We believe was putting a series of tenets or beliefs out. This is what the university stands for. This is who we are. This is what we believe. And in doing so, tying those beliefs directly back to an impact, back to an action. So the stories ladder up to these larger ideas and are linked together in doing so. And there was television for both, and this is the print for both, and I'll talk a bit about that as well. We also tested a series of taglines that this is culled from a much, much, much larger list. But the taglines that we tested were Be Boundless, Together Undaunted, which you may remember from the pyramid, Together We Will, Go Beyond, and Every Moment Matters. So the key takeaways were pretty simple, actually. We believe resonated a great deal, and I'll go back to this and talk a bit about why, but we believe was the direction that people really, really went toward. And the reason was the notion that the university said what they believed and put our beliefs out there strongly and tied them back to action felt really unique to people. It felt really differentiating, it felt really exciting, and it gave people a really clear picture of who and what this place is. We also heard that Be Boundless as a tagline was a clear winner consistently across all of the groups. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasons why. So boundless opportunity is a highly resonant and compelling idea. The notion that anything is possible at this university is great, but for this student population, it matters a great deal. These are people who believe they can do anything. They believe that with the right inputs, they can achieve anything. They don't see limitations in their own life, and in this they saw a boundlessness that felt really appealing to them. You know, I think it's important that Gerald's talked a little bit about in some of the testing. It wasn't really about the university telling them to constantly move forward, Be Boundless was sort of a multi-directional or omnidirectional idea that for them gave them permission to explore and to discover and find new sides of themselves, but at the same time was reflecting a belief back in them that, yes, you really can do anything. The belief statements clearly conveyed a distinctive University of Washington point of view, and I think we'll see that even more clearly as we get into the work. But those tenets really were a big deal to people. It was a balance for our bold, confident personality was balanced very much with our compassion in that idea, and again, we talked about why that was so important. And kind of most importantly, it speaks strongly to the mindset that we seek to attract. So again, that belief in possibility, that greater good focus, that making a difference, that I task myself and hold myself accountable, and that commitment to working together. All of those things were the things that we heard back from the people that we were doing the testing with, which was great because they were the things that we believed were so key going into the testing. So, okay, so let's talk about what it means to be boundless. Let's talk about what that tagline means and how it starts to come to life. At its simplest, it's a belief in possibility. It's about opportunity and potential, a deep and unshakable faith in who you are, where you want to go, and your ability to get there, regardless of the challenges that stand in your way. It's a connection to those around you and a commitment to change for the good of all. It's the drive to break down barriers and work together to seek answers and find solutions. It's a belief, an optimism, that individually and collectively we can create a bright future. It's a spirit, it's a hunger, it's a feeling, and most of all, it's the actions we take. We are boundless, just like the world around us.
I just want to add something about the creative testing because I know we're going to go through this. And we sat through all of these 18 groups, and Ben's talked about the student audience, but we shared this with alumni and friends in the last 2 weeks. We shared the results, the same presentation that we're sharing with you. And alumni of the institution particularly, in this one presentation, were practically cheering when Ben was done speaking about the Be Boundless concept. And it was interesting for me to reflect on some of what Gerald and I particularly learned in the testing. And I just want to share some of the, just quickly. For example, for those of you in the Marketing Strategy Council and who went through the Imagine session with us, you know that there was a concept of every moment matters, or that this moment matters, that was very resonant, and people were sort of galvanizing around that as a creative space. And when we shared that space with prospective students particularly, but with parents and alumni, we got similar reactions, but the students were hilarious, of course. They said things like, my God, you're terrifying me. I don't want every moment to matter. I want to make mistakes. You know, I'm going to college, and this is not the kind of, you're putting too much pressure on me. This is like high pressure sales. And so I just want to emphasize about creative testing. I've done a lot of creative testing over many, many years. You're not asking people whether they like it. You're not asking them, you know, does this, let's all vote here on which one you think is the most catchy or clever. You're asking them, does this compel you to change, you know, what does this say to you about the University of Washington? What are they saying to you? Is this compelling you to change your perception or compelling you to take an action? Does it change your mind about the way you might think about certain things? And we heard a lot of strange kind of perceptions of mind changing that perhaps needed, you know, we need to do some perception shaping there. And the Be Boundless space moved people into a place for this university that, I mean, I've sat through probably, you know, 50 to 75 groups over the past 7 years in creative testing. I've never seen a group move so closely into a space around Be Boundless where they left the creative testing fired up to affiliate with the institution. So super fun. I get to do the commercial because I'm the brand, but it was really phenomenal how that went forward. That's all.
Good ad. That's all true. Okay, so. No, and we also, for what it's worth, we're really excited about Be Boundless too, because I think we see it as a platform to tell really great stories. So this is probably not necessary for this group, but I think it's an important thing for us to remind ourselves of throughout the university, throughout the institution. This is more than a campaign. This is more than just marketing. This is a shared core belief that this is about brand. The thinking, the position, the path we've taken to get here will have a profound effect on the way we move forward as an institution. They will serve both as an external expression of who we are and as an internal standard for our actions and our behaviors, right? That notion that we like to say a great brand position, a great expression of who you are shouldn't put weight on an institution, it should put pressure on an institution. So we should hold ourselves to this and say, are we being boundless? Are we operating in a way? Are we telling stories about boundlessness? But it should never feel like a drag on us. And as we move forward together, it becomes a rallying cry and a way to recognize our progress. So let's get into the creative. And again, I think you said this, I think I've said it, but I'll say it one last time. We really did listen closely to what we heard in testing, and in listening closely, we're able to really optimize and create stuff coming out of testing that was better than it was going into it. That is not always the way testing works, and when it does work that way, it's delightful, and this was delightful. So I'm going to take you through where we're at. First thing is these tenets. I've talked about them a couple times. I've referenced them a couple times. Literally putting belief statements out there that we can tell stories around. The tenets that we're launching with, that we're very excited about, that will continue to live and evolve over time are the following. Together undaunted. We is greater than me. Dare to do. Be the first. Question the answer. Passion never rests. And be a world of good. And I hope very much that you can see how those map back to the personality traits that we talked about, map back to the strategy that we talked about, but really have flexibility to tell a wide range of stories. I mean, for example, something like Be the First can absolutely be a story about innovation. It can also be a story about courage. It can be the story about starting a movement. So it can be about, I'm the person who thought of something that no one else did, or I'm the person who stepped forward and saw the opportunity for change and started something bigger than myself. That flexibility is important as we all think about collectively all the stories that we need to tell as a university. So we're going to show kind of two types of ads today. And this first is really about a feeling more than it is about a specific story or a specific impact. This notion of sort of launching, and I'll just caveat the heck out of this. This is all stock photography right now. But that wasn't that big of a caveat, but I'm just putting it out there. Really asked ourselves, can we tell stories that are about making people feel what this university is about? And then can we also tell stories that are very specific about what we're doing? And this first is obviously the former versus the latter. This notion of be boundless as an idea, as a spirit, as a way of seeing the world. I'll talk a little bit about the design system around it. This notion of the boundless W, which is something we've talked a lot about. The idea that the brand itself can't be contained by the page, so the identity always sort of threatening to break out of the confines of the layout, and I will talk very much more about that in guidelines going forward, and I look at Gerald and laugh because I know that we've got a lot of rules around that, but that idea of how do we express the sort of boundlessness and the lack of being able to be contained even in the expression of the design itself. So these tenets sort of as posters, these tenets as feelings, these tenets as direct emotional appeals are sort of the first place to start. So Together We Will, again, a story of either a story of collaboration, a story of teamwork, could be a story about the way we break down barriers between departments. In this case, it's a story really linking back to a strong cue back to the university, which is the crew team. We is greater than me. Again, in every case, we see be boundless as the unifying element. We see a call back to the website, and we'll talk about how that works. Be the first, again, an example of sort of compassion, thinking about less about a specific innovation moment and more of a moment of starting a movement, doing something bigger than yourself. Dare to do, again, a story of courage linking back to the arts, trying to do things that are a little bit unexpected. So one thing we heard from that transformation campaign was that those juxtapositions were interesting, those notions of framing an image that I might expect in one direction with a message that I might expect in another was something that we're playing with inside of this campaign as well. Be a world of good. Question the answer. An example of how an ad like this can even sort of be more of an issues ad. So I don't know if you can see it here, but for example, a coal plant and asking students, question the answer. This is the current state. Do you see a different way to be? Do you see a different, better future? Are you the person who's going to discover the next answer? So being able to be topical, being able to be focused, and being able to sort of challenge ourselves a little bit. And then the other type of message that we're going to put out there is this notion, which is telling specific stories. So in this case, not really leading with the tenet the same way, but asking a question where the tenet serves as a payoff. So want to change the conversation? Question the answer. Existing science said 6-year-old brain cancer patient Hayden Strum couldn't be saved. Professor Jim Olson and his team of student researchers refused to listen. Instead, they developed a way to use scorpion venom to illuminate tumor cells, making it easier to identify and remove tumors for patients like Hayden. To find out more about how we're uncovering new answers, go to uw.edu. Be boundless. So, a couple things happening here. Tying the tenet to a specific impact and action where the world has been influenced, but also showing students a place where they can participate. Telling a story that lets them see, this is the type of work that I can do. These are the type of things that I can be a part of. This is what the University of Washington offers the world, but also offers me. What happens when you think small? Be a world of good. And I'm going to switch to the, that's going to be very small for me to read, so 1 second here. Actually, I'll just talk about it. This is a story about the engineering students here who are developing teleoperated robotics to go into disaster zones. So this notion of thinking small, a bit of a provocative question, different than a university might typically ask, this idea of paying it off with be a world of good. These students are developing these very easily operated robots that are cheap, that are somewhat disposable, that are controlled by just average people without a lot of training, that can go into these disaster zones and find victims, identify where they're at, and help aid rescue efforts. So that story, that notion of being a world of good, tied directly to an impact. And again, a place where students can say, wow, that's the type of work that's happening here. That's the type of thing that I can do. That's what happens at a great research institution, but it happens at a human scale. An example as well is how we can start to bring things to life on the website. Want to change the conversation, question the answer. We think on the web we can go deeper with these stories, utilizing video in some cases, utilizing more of the students themselves telling those stories, getting into the science itself, really letting those tenets be up there as headers and let people sort of work their way through the stories as they go. And then last, but certainly not least, there's the television, which I always apologize profusely for. The worst way to hear television is to hear it read off of a script by a person standing behind a podium with a mic. So hold on tight. No, imagine that this will be 30 seconds when it's done and amazing. Instead of me describing it, it'll be actual amazingness. So we're going to go through it. So this we call it boundless future. And the technique we're using here, and it's something we really heard resonated strongly in testing, was this series of match cuts. So an action that starts in one frame that continues in an abstract way in the other. So the way I always describe it is, I hand a water bottle to somebody in one frame. In the next frame, that water bottle becomes a baton, and a runner takes it and goes. So that idea of I start something, I catalyze something, and it moves, it's larger than I am. So we hear the first notes of a violin playing softly, and we hear the voiceover that says, how do you change the world? Well, on screen, we see a young woman tying the laces of her running shoes. On her wrist is a purple bracelet that says, we is greater than me. And these tenets, one thing we heard in testing, we had them in big supers before, and we heard in testing, boy, they're a little bit overwhelming. I want to know what they mean. I want to see them in context. So we've kind of put them in the ads sort of as discovered elements, sort of as contextual elements in situ, which is a kind of a fun thing you'll see play out. Behind her on the fridge is a UW acceptance letter. She runs out the door as we hear a voice in the background, perhaps her mom, saying, good luck, sweetie. The announcer continues. How do you change the world? It starts with a single step. We cut to that same girl dribbling the ball down, a soccer ball down the field at Husky Stadium now, at the soccer stadium. We see be the first along the sidelines on a sign, so another one of our tenants showing up. She kicks the ball to a teammate, and as she does, that traveling, rolling ball becomes the open door of a laundry, of a washing machine. And we see a UW shirt, a purple shirt, being plopped into a laundry machine amongst white clothing, and that t-shirt reads, dare to do. So that iconic student moment of doing your laundry for the first time and throwing a purple shirt into white laundry on hot with bleach. Congratulations, students. You are the greatest. So we close crop to that laundry machine, and we see the water steadily rising up the door, and then we match cut to see a research robot emerging from the water, okay? So that research robot is emerging from Lake Washington. The camera switches to reveal the boat, and the boat has the words "Passion Never Rests." That's the name on the back of the boat. We cut to a wide shot of Lake Washington in the mountains, highlighting the region itself, which is an important thing to do, but done in context in an interesting way. We hear the echo of researchers kind of whooping in celebration of the robot's successful dive. That cheering echoes through, and the shot switches to a conductor leading an orchestra practicing together at Meany Hall. A glimpse of the sheet music reveals that the song that they're playing is called Be a World of Good. They play in tandem with the music, and we hear that playing in real time. We then, as the conductor raises his hands and drops them back down, we cut to the UW band at the stadium playing a sliver of Bow Down to Washington. We pan out to a wide shot of fans and cheerleaders celebrating, holding a sign up that says Together Undaunted. One cheerleader begins to take a running tumble, and as she does, we cut back to that first girl that we saw, now running along through the campus. As the announcer says, you don't have to know what the destination looks like. And we see the busy, vibrant UW vista behind her as she goes. The announcer continues, you just have to have the courage to take the first step. As she enters the classroom, opens the door, all eyes turn to her. And it's that moment. It's not a hostile moment, but it's a moment of, are you going to step forward or are you going to step back? And we see her with tenacity in her eyes, as the chalkboard behind her, the whiteboard, I always say chalkboard. The modern classroom with a whiteboard says, question the answer. With courage, tenacity, with boldness in her eyes, she closes the door. And as she does, The announcer continues, so what are you waiting for? We cut to black, we see the UW logo, the music cuts out, we see the tagline, and we're there. So that voiceover, which again, we'll go more about this speed, how do you change the world? It starts with a single step. You don't have to know what the destination looks like, you just have to have the courage to take the first step. So what are you waiting for? So we're challenging students, we're asking them to take a step, we're also giving them permission to explore. We're showing them what a day in the life looks like. We're doing it in a way that shows them all the different possibilities of who they can be. They can be somebody focused on the arts. They can be a scientist. They can be an athlete. They can just be somebody doing their laundry. But in all of those things, they're able to project what the University of Washington looks like, what they look like as a part of the University of Washington, and at the same time, that's tied directly back to the beliefs, to the tenets, to the statements of who we are. So that's the TV spot, which again will be ever more exciting in real life than it was right now, if you can believe it.